I am going to give you a couple hints that should help you through the balancing as well. First thing would be to start with the elements that have the smallest number of atoms. So let's say we're doing an equation that has 1 carbon on one side and 2 on the other, but also has 6 fluorines on one side and 12 on the other. The one you're going to want to start with is your carbon because it has the smaller number of atoms and it's going to be easier to balance first. The next hint is going to be balancing your oxygens and hydrogens last. These are tricky and they make everything else harder to balance if you do it first. So always leave these till the end. So here's an example. We have Na plus O2 makes Na2O. So first, remember we need to figure out the number of atoms for each element that we have. So we're going to write Na and O. So on my reactant side, remember my reactant side is the left side, this side over here, we have 1 atom of sodium and 2 atoms of oxygen. On my product side, we have 2 atoms of sodium and 1 atom of oxygen. Alright, the next step is going to be picking which one we want to balance first. Remember my hint said that's not to do oxygens first, so that leaves us with sodium. We're going to start with sodium. Now we're going to add a coefficient to the formula that has sodium in it on whatever side of the equation that we need to increase the number. So looking here, sodium has 2 on this side, on the product side, and 1 on the reactant side. So first, we're going to try to increase the number on the reactant side. So we could take and put a 2 as our coefficient here, which means now we have 2 sodiums on this side and 2 sodiums on the product side. Well, that looks balanced to me. Alright, so next step. Now that our sodiums are balanced, we need to balance our oxygens. So look at our numbers. On the reactant side, we have 2 oxygens. On the product side, we have 1. So we could add a 2 in front of here, in front of the whole formula, to give us 2 oxygens. But, that changes our sodiums and now we have 4. Alright, simple fix. Go back, balance your sodiums again. Instead of a 2 in front of the sodium, let's put a 4. That means now we have 4 sodiums plus O2, which 2 oxygens, which makes 2 molecules of Na2O. And if you look at your numbers, you've got 4 and 4 sodiums, 2 and 2 oxygens. So this is a balanced equation. Only adding coefficients and changing it until you have the same number of atoms on both sides. Let's try another one. This one's a little bit more complicated. We've got copper plus AgNO3, which makes copper NO3 plus Ag. So first step, identifying your elements and how many atoms they have on both sides of the equation. So the first one we have is copper, then silver, nitrogen, and oxygen. So don't forget, even though this is a polyatomic ion, they are separate elements, so we need to treat them as they are separate. So now let's count our atoms. Copper on the reactant side has 1, and on the product side also has 1. Silver on the reactant side has 1, and on the product side also has 1. Nitrogen on the reactant side has 1, but on the product side it has 2. Don't forget, we've got to foil this inside. So now we're going to have 2 nitrogens, and we're going to have 2 times 3. That means we're going to have 6 oxygens on the product side, and we've got 3 on the reactant side. So next step, picking the element that we want to balance first. And remember my hints, do oxygens and hydrogens last. So it looks like that leaves us with nitrogen because copper and silver are balanced, and the only other element there is oxygen. So we pick nitrogen. And it looks like we have 1 more atom on the product side than we do on the reactants. So in order to get these 2 numbers the same, in order to get 1 and 2 the same, we can put a 2 in front of the AgNO3 on the reactant side. So if we put that 2 there, that changes our nitrogen to 2, but it also changes our silver to 2, and now it makes our oxygen 6, because 2 times 3 is 6. Well, looks like that took care of our oxygen for us too. But now our silvers are unbalanced. All right, it looks like we have 1 more atom of silver on the reactant side now than we do on the products. Well, again, to get these numbers the same, let's put a coefficient on the product side in front of the silver, and looks like we can make it a 2, which means now we have 2 silvers on the product side. Looking at all our numbers, we got to make sure they're balanced. Copper has 1 and 1, silver has 2 and 2, nitrogen has 2 and 2, oxygen has 6 and 6. We are balanced. So we've added a 2 coefficient in front of AgNO3 on the reactant side, and a 2 coefficient to the Ag on the product side. Seems simple enough. All right, well then let's try this one. If you would like to take a moment and try to do this on your own, now would be the time to pause the video and try it and then come back for the answer. All right, so let's do this. We've got potassium plus O2 makes potassium 2O. All right, so we have potassium and oxygen. How many atoms do we have on each side? Well, on the reactant side, we have 1 potassium and 2 oxygens. But on the product side, we have 2 potassiums and 1 oxygen. All right, so starting to balance, let's start with potassium. We have 1 more potassium on the product side than on the reactants, and we can make the numbers the same by putting a 2 coefficient in front of the potassium there, which means we have 2 and 2 now. And now we got to try to balance our oxygens. Well, we have 1 more oxygen on the reactant side than we do on the product side. An easy fix would be to add a 2 there, which means now we have 2 of those, but now we have 4 of these. Man, I feel like we've been in this situation before. So instead of that being a 2, it's now going to be a 4 in order to get these numbers the same. All right, let's try this one. We have aluminum plus sulfur, which makes aluminum sulfide. So, aluminum and sulfur, let's count the atoms. On the reactant side, aluminum has 1 and sulfur has 1. On the product side, aluminum has 2 and sulfur has 3. Well, since they're separate on the reactant side, which looks like that's where we need to start our balancing, this should be a fairly simple balance, because all we need to do is add a 2 in front of the aluminum on the reactant side to make that balanced, and add a 3 in front of the sulfur on the reactant side to make that balanced. There we go. This is the end of the lesson for today. Have a great day and happy balancing.